Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office. Our guest tonight is a cinematic icon. He's a wizard in special effects and a phenomenal filmmaker. He's done films from 2001, Blade Runner, Close Encounters, and I am so jazzed to have you as our guest here on Double Feature. Douglas Trumbull, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to jump right in. How did you get started in movies at a very young age, pre-2001?
Well, I was a young guy reading science fiction when I was in high school, in junior high school. I was a big science fiction fan. And as I started becoming an artist, my portfolio was filled with science fiction type stuff, alien planets and spacecraft and stars and planets. And so that ultimately led to kind of a career doing space films for the government at a company called Graphic Films in LA. And then that company, Graphic Films, did a film which I worked on called To the Moon and Beyond in the New York World's Fair. And that was seen by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke, projected on this giant 70 millimeter dome screen. And they said, yes, that's what we need for 2001. The whole movie was a big research and development project because no one knew where we were going to go or how we were going to do it. It had never been done like that before. Right. And Kubrick and Clarke were actually continuing to develop the story while we were shooting the film. So the script was changing every day.
Wow.
Because we would learn something every day and then he would change the next day, et cetera. So that went on throughout the entire production because it was an exploration of cinema. It was Cinerama, 70 millimeter, right. These giant 90-foot, 100-foot wide screens that were about maybe 54 of those theaters around the world in major cities.
Yep.
And special 70 millimeter projectors and multi-channel sound systems.
It was a real event.
It was a real event. It was really spectacular. And Kubrick felt a kind of a responsibility to make something epically big for this big screen. And that started influencing his directorial style.
And he also was a rule breaker, right? He was a guy who's, like yourself, you guys were, there's a simpatico. Yeah. As far as personality, you guys are you're visionaries, you're rule breakers, you try to do things that haven't been done before.
Yeah.
So how did that work into his style, so to speak?
Well, I mean, there were several aspects of it. One was that Kubrick is, or was, he's no longer alive, but a genius level man and very intelligent and very thoughtful and really trying to do something new and different that no one had ever seen before, and wanted to explore new territory. And he had no fear about taking risks or trying to do something that had never been done. He says, well, we're going to figure it out and we're going to do it and we're going to succeed. That was his attitude. Yeah. And he was my mentor, really. This was film school for me, working with Kubrick. And so we got along great. And it turned out that because I was starting as a young, almost an apprentice level guy, I was doing animation. And my first job on 2001 was figuring out how to make these fake computer readouts for HAL.
Oh, right.
And so we started doing that, and he said, well, boy, Doug's pretty good at that, and so I'll give him something a little harder. And I would do that, and then something a little harder. And over the course of the movie, I worked my way up until I was one of the four heads of the entire.
And everything seemed real. I mean, it had to have a sense of realism.
It had to be real, and it had to be extremely high quality. There was no room for error. There could be no flaw. There could be no scratch. There could be no piece of bad paint on a set or a miniature. It had to be perfect.
There's so much to talk about 2001 because it was so groundbreaking, and there's so many iconic images. Let's talk about that last sequence.
Well, the last sequence at near the end of the movie, they've arrived at their destination because some signal has been sent from the moon to Jupiter, and they don't know why, so they've gone to Jupiter to figure out why. And at Jupiter, they find this monolith orbiting one of the moons of Jupiter. They said, well, that's part of the puzzle, because there was one of them on the moon. And they get close to the monolith, and we had a really hard time trying to figure, well, what do we do now? Because the storyboards and the original story written by Clarke called for a slot to be revealed, kind of a monolith-shaped slot in the planet.
Like a door.
Like a door. And so if you look down the slot, you'd see another universe at the other end of the slot. That was how it was originally written. And so we're all thinking about, well, how do we do that? How do we make it look good? We did storyboard drawings that are interesting but impossible to film. And we started talking a lot about this whole issue of transforming through time and space, and that these beings are somehow omniscient and omnipotent, and time and space is irrelevant, and you can be anywhere at any time, and so time and space has to be broken. And Kubrick did this one really cool shot that he worked out with his cinematographer, which is Keir Delay,
Yep.
who's playing Bowman, is in this close-up, and he's looking at this Stargate thing, and he's starting to be buffeted
Yep.
by something happening. And what they did was they kept shaking Keir Delay in a chair and slowly slowing the camera down from 24 frames a second down to 1 frame a second.
Wow.
And then compensating the iris in the camera so the exposure stayed constant. So he just starts blurring more and more and more to where he progressively becomes abstracted into this blurry,
right.
quivering shape. And then you cut to the Stargate, which is this corridor of light, and that was all done in a similar way. It was a controlled blur. And if you can imagine, if you just were in a dark room like this and you moved a flashlight while the shutter of the camera was open, you'd see a streak of light exposed onto the film. Well, we started figuring out how to control that, and we had a bar of light we called a slit, lit from behind. Artwork was passing behind the slit, and then the camera was moving toward the slit, so you accumulate a plane of light with patterns on
Beautiful.
it as a result of the moving artwork, which was op art and colored gels and filters and things. And it created this abstract corridor of light, for lack of a better description.
Which no one had ever seen before.
No one had ever seen before, and it created the abstract traveling through space and time that was necessary for the movie. And then the movie becomes increasingly abstract after that, one shot after another, these most amazing exploding galaxies and supernovas and planetary surfaces. And
I think you almost have to see that film every 5 years to get some kind of new education about the film. Every time I see it, I'm going, oh, I didn't notice that, or I didn't experience that.
Well, the movie, in a way, it became kind of a 60s light show.
Yes.
Like a light show being the kind of things they do at a rock and roll concert,
right.
where they just project all over the walls and ceiling with liquids and
Right.
stars and strobe lights and all this kind of stuff. And initially, the movie was not successful. It was badly reviewed. No one in the normal critical movie reviewing world knew what to make out of this movie. They didn't understand it at all.
Right.
And about 30 days into the release of 2001, the studio was ready to abandon the movie and pull the plug. And they said, there's nobody who gets it. The reviews are bad and there's nobody in the theater. Until one of the guys at the MGM publicity department said, let's call it The Ultimate Trip. They rebranded the movie The Ultimate Trip, and people started smoking a little pot and going and sitting in the front row.
Right.
And they're just saying, wow, whoa, this is awesome.
And I would hear that. I hear that.
So that was really part of the transformation of people's understanding of what Kubrick was trying to do as a filmmaker,
Right.
was to transport the audience to another dimension.
So then, Doug, you went from 2001 to Silent Running, which was about $1 million budget, and you were directing. What was that?
Well, I mean, I'd just been through this great film school with Stanley Kubrick as my mentor, and I thought, well, I can do this. I'd like to give it a try. I felt I had to be cautious. There wasn't going to be a lot of money for a first-time director. There never is. So it's kind of an independent kind of thing. But there was an interesting new program at Universal Studios that through a friend of mine, I found out about this thing, that because of Easy Rider being an independent film, shot very low budget, huge success, made millions of dollars, the studio wanted to do a social experiment to see if they could make movies like that. And they consciously decided, they said, let's just do 5 experiments, 5 movies, $1 million each, and let the directors do whatever they want.
Final cut?
Final cut. They're not going to read the script. They're not going to come to the set. They're not going to interfere. They're just going to sit back and wait and see what happens.
So it's almost like, we don't know what we're doing anymore. Let's let the filmmakers tell us what to do.
Yeah. So Milos Forman made one. This was American Graffiti, I think, was George Lucas's film. Silent Running was one of them. I can't remember what the others were.
Right.
Wow. And it was a really great time because I'm not only directing for the first time, but no one's messing with me.
Unbelievable.
It's just, and it's
Going-
never happened again. But
Yeah, but
believe me, this is very,
you went from 2001 to then go to silent running where you have freedom.
yeah. And so I had a big responsibility to demonstrate, well, I can write, I can direct, I can produce, etc. Working with Mike Gruskoff and then Bruce Stern, Gruskoff and I both selected Bruce. We really liked him. We thought he was great. Yep. I had written this initial idea to have a small cast.
And just to set for the audience, the story, can you tell them what the story is on silent running?
Silent running is they call it an ecological tale about a spacecraft that's orbiting way out beyond the Earth, and it's carrying all the flora and fauna of Earth. Earth has been decimated. There's no living thing except people living in air-conditioned comfort.
It's a Noah's Ark for the
Noah's Ark of plants
right.
and animals. It's like an ark, and there's several of them out there. And so you establish that at the very beginning of the movie, and you establish there's a little tension between Bruce Stern and the other crew members because he's kind of an oddball. And then right at the beginning of the movie, they get the orders to just go ahead and throw them away, blow them up, and come back home without them. And he feels a really profound ethical dilemma of whether he can allow this to happen. And he's ready to sacrifice himself if he has to protect these plants and animals from destruction. And he ends up killing the other guys and
right.
stealing the ship. And that's where the name Silent Running actually comes from submarine warfare, where a submarine that wanted to play like it was sunk would throw a bunch of debris out the
right.
port and make the people on the surface think that it had sunk and there was an oil slick, but the submarine is sneaking away.
Run silent, run deep.
It's the same idea.
Yeah.
So that was why I named it that. And that's what the story is about. He's all alone, and the only help he's got, the only accompaniment he has is these little robots who help maintain the ship.
Huey, Louie, and Dewey.
Yeah, Huey, Louie, and Dewey, which was named after Donald Duck's grandchildren.
Nephews. Was it McScrooge or no, maybe not.
You know, I think they're Donald Duck's nephews.
Okay,
but, you know, that's irrelevant.
Right, but you liked it.
Yeah, but it was a very simple story, structurally as though it was like one man alone in the tundra of the Antarctica with 3 sled dogs.
Right.
And he's going to anthropomorphize them in order to keep himself from going nuts.
Right.
And so that's kind of the way the story unfolds. And he befriends these robots. He reprograms them to help him. They help do surgery on him because he's hurt himself in this fight. And then they start taking care of the ship themselves. So I'm not going to tell you the whole story,
right.
but it's a very simple story.
And you really did also do some breakthrough because you were using everything was practical. So you had these robots, which were you had people who had
they're called bilateral amputees.
Yeah.
People who have no legs, and people can get that way from landmines in Vietnam or from birth defect or any number of things. And so I had seen a character like this in Todd Browning's movie, The Freaks. There was this amazing performer named Johnny Eck who walked on his hands. He wore a tuxedo and walked on his hands, and he was handsome, well-spoken, articulate, smart. I thought, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like this.
Right.
And that was a seminal idea for the movie, to write this movie about these robots that could be housed, they could house a real person that had that disability, but they wouldn't look like a human being at all because there'd be no legs and there'd be no shoulders and there'd be no head. It would all be designed to hide all that.
Right.
So there's just this looks like a little refrigerator walking on its
There's no way an audience member, how do they do that? You actually sold it and made it happen.
Yeah, this is where the studio was willing to take a leap of faith. They had no clue what we were doing, and they just said, well, let's let Doug have his way. And it would be very hard today in today's business environment to get anything past them.
Corporate.
And then I was trying to bring this homey, heartful feeling into the movie because I was kind of reacting to the kind of cold scientific certitude of 2001, and I wanted something very warmer and more humane and human and ethical. And so that was how it was all constructed. And I had things that you would never get away with today. I mean, I had this funky little thing where Bruce Dern has a child's watering can Now, there's no reason in the world he would use a child's watering can, but there's a picture of his daughter on the wall. You don't know anything about his past history
Right.
or the family he left behind or anything. But for me, it worked that he had a child's watering can.
Right.
And then to later on in the movie, the robots take over because he's gone, and the robot is using the child's watering can, carrying on his behalf.
Wow.
You would never get that past the script department in
Right.
Hollywood today.
Right.
They'd say, that's cornball beyond belief.
Right.
But it actually works.
It's great
really
storytelling. It's great storytelling.
Yeah, I think
And honestly, too, the idea of what you did with the amputees, I mean, that really kind of paved the way for George Lucas with Star Wars, what he did with R2-D2, and then for Steven Spielberg when he did with Carlo Rambaldi when they did E.T.
Yeah.
I mean, that you paved that way.
Yeah.
So you go from silent and running, and how did you feel after the experience? Because you now had made your first feature film that you directed. How did you feel when you were done?
Well, I felt very satisfied that I was able to pull it off, and I was satisfied that the movie, the studio didn't ask for any cuts or any changes. They said, this is great.
They stayed
We're going to
with-
put it out as is.
Yeah.
I said, that's great. The shock to me that happened subsequently was another social experiment they decided to do, which was to see if the movie could carry its weight on word of mouth without an advertising campaign.
Oh, okay.
Huge mistake.
Yes.
And I couldn't control it. I actually didn't know at the time that they were kind of pulling the campaign
Right.
and trying to see if the movie could get legs by itself by word of mouth. And so that was a big shock to me. But that was,
That's such an important part of the business, too.
and it's a very important, if people don't know about it, they're not going to pay any attention
Yeah.
to it. And so that was part of my learning curve, to understand that the movie business is a business. They're trying all kinds of things like that all the time with every movie. Every movie has to find a different audience. Every movie has to be marketed differently.
Yeah.
And I was really naive at the time about those attributes. I thought, well, I'm just going to be an artist. My job is to make the movie. Everybody else is going to
Right.
market it or sell it or make the poster for it or whatever. So my life has been this combination of trying to work as a film director, writer, producer, and try to understand how this business works.
Yeah. But you're always your arts always seems to be ahead of the curve. I mean, you're always ahead, and sometimes it's the corporation, if we'll call it the studios, the corporation is trying to catch up to where you are. You're always like so many years, sometimes decades ahead.
Well, I have to be cautious. It's no point being too far ahead.
Right.
You got to be practical.
Right.
You got to make something that people want to see and want to go to.
Right.
But I had my own method, which was that I was seeing ahead, and I was seeing, there is this huge future for 70 millimeter. There's a huge future for higher frame rates,
Immersion.
bigger screens, and all these things. And I'll actually pay my way by servicing Blade Runner or Close Encounters or other movies. Star Trek was an extreme experience, in order to get my hands on the 70 millimeter cameras and the lenses and the lights and the studio equipment I needed
Right.
to fulfill my other bigger dream.
Right.
And so that had its ups and downs, because the studio doesn't want to know that any of their budget's going for research and development.
Right. Right.
So you have to keep it a secret.
Yep. Let's go. We'll go to Close Encounters. Let's go to Close Encounters, because you made some discoveries with Close Encounters about, creating, whether it was creating clouds, things that we start to see in other movies. Talk about that for a little bit. Steven Spielberg approaching you and.
Well, Steven wanted. I'll go back for a second, because Steven had, unbeknownst to me, been doing a lot of research on the whole UFO phenomena, very serious research.
Which that's something you're interested in.
I continue to be interested in it, but he was very close with J. Allen Hynek. And he's a famous UFO researcher. He's no longer alive.
I think I saw a picture of him with a pipe.
He's got a pipe, and he does a little walk-on
Right.
during the end sequence of the movie. But he had helped Steven understand the whole UFO story and had written many books about it. And Hynek had actually been hired by the government to debunk it. And in the process of him debunking it, said, no. There's something going on here that's really big. And so he swapped, and they kicked him out of the government, and he became a private individual, really trying to understand what was going on. What I didn't know was that Steven was also reading books by Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is also a UFO researcher who knew Hynek at the time, and Jacques is still alive. and well. And he is a major UFO researcher. And Stephen had been reading his books and kind of liberally saying, well, that could happen, that could happen, that could happen. And it's made me realize, oh, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that the mothership and the UFOs and the clouds are all real? Is Stephen reenacting something that he's read in one of Jacques Vallée's books? And I think that may be true.
And he became the Lacombe character.
He became the French UFO researcher.
Francois Truffaut.
Jacques' story, played by Francois Truffaut in the book. Jacques' actual story, because I've met him. I made it my job to meet him, and we've been really good friends, was that when he was about 6 or 10 years old in France, in the suburb of Paris, he saw a UFO land in a field right next to his home. And it was verified by a friend of his, another kid up the block, who saw the same thing. So he knew it wasn't some dream or hallucination. And so Jacques, his entire life was changed by this event. And so even though he has his day job, you know, he's a Silicon Valley investment banker, his night job is trying to figure out what's going on. And
What's happening?
He's written many books prior to Close Encounters and many books since Close Encounters.
Wow.
And he's a good friend, and we're both working on trying to figure out what is going on.
What's beyond?
Yeah, and Jacques feels very much like what Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke did in 2001, which is that they are interdimensional intelligences of some kind. They can pop in and out of our space. They fold time and space like nothing. And so they can go from here to Tau Ceti in a fraction of a second. And they don't fly around, and they're not in a UFO cruising through the universe. That's why you won't see them on telescopes.
You know, it's kind of interesting. If you think about what you talk about with film rates and, you know, whether we're normally 24 frames a second is what we were used to, and now you're talking about we see things with our eyes in a different process that you're talking about to make us more real, and it's 100 frames a second. It's interesting because beings that could be here that we might not see, like we don't see the molecules. We don't see these things that are here surrounding us.
Yeah, I mean, human sight is limited to a certain spectrum of light.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff in the infrared or ultraviolet or outside of our spectrum that may be visible to other creatures, which are, we know that's true.
Right.
And there's no reason why aliens couldn't see things that we can't see, or that they could be in a way that we can't see.
Right.
And there's every reason to believe that aliens might want to be completely quiet about what they're doing, because they might be moving through time, which could create paradoxes and all kinds of disturbances. And so they don't want to mess with anything.
Yeah.
He feels, and I feel, that there's something going on that's really quite benign, that they're studying us or they want to help us. And there's a lot of stories about the relationship between UFOs, aliens, and nuclear weapons, for example. There's a lot of reports of aliens and UFO sightings right around nuclear weapons tests out in the desert or at the various high radiation sites or missile silos and things like that.
Do you see them as like bipedal or not, or
that's
humanoid in form or not? Or
that's what there's like literally hundreds of thousands of reports of little gray guys, which is what Spielberg used in Close Encounters. He used children with big heads and big eyes and little small fingers, and there's millions of reports that are exactly identical, and so there's every reason to believe that that's consistent.
Like that Puck character, I think it was Puck.
But there's also reports of reptilians and insectoids and all kinds of stuff, and there's one insectoid in Close Encounters. Remember when the mothership first lands, there's this weird kind of creature that comes
that
out
was that.
and does this kind of thing. I puppeteered that shot.
That was phenomenal.
And it was a puppet. It was a string puppet.
Wow.
It was very thin, with the, almost Jacobetti kind of body and
that was amazing.
Limbs.
Yeah.
And you know, we made it look good because we used a lot of lens flares and covered things up with light and lens flares to get away with it.
And then Ridley Scott, I saw in an interview, he said Blade Runner came around, he goes, I refuse to make the movie without the help of Doug Trumbull. I won't make the movie without Doug Trumbull.
Well, I wish I had known that when I negotiated my salary.
Well, I am letting you know. How was that experience? And
it was great.
Iconic imagery of Hades, and you did all that.
Yeah, that was right after Close Encounters. And Ridley's movie was kind of the beneficiary of Close Encounters because we solved a lot of problems. We built the first motion control systems. We figured out how to do lens flares and glows and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of similarity visual between Close Encounters and Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like the blimp in Blade Runner kind of looks like the mothership in a way if you think about it
Yeah.
consciously. You might not notice it immediately, but the UFOs in Close Encounters are similar to the spinners flying around
Right.
in Blade Runner. And Blade Runner was actually a very low budget movie at the time. And so we didn't have a lot of money to do anything. So we had to be really clever and really fast. And during Blade Runner, I was about to direct Brainstorm. So I had to make a deal with Ridley. I said, you know, I'm going to have to move on. And so is Richard Jurisic, my partner. He's going to be my director of photography. So we just figured out a way to transition out of Blade Runner right at the end of it.
Wow.
So the effects shooting was still going on under a guy named Dave Dreyer that we appointed,
Yep.
trained, and showed him everything we wanted to do. He did a beautiful job finishing stuff up for us, and, you know, carrying on the style that we set for the movie.
It's, I mean, come on. All these movies that we're talking about, they all stand the test of time, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm really proud of because I like what I call organic effects and miniatures.
Yeah, I love it.
And I think that there's certain difficulties with computer graphics. They're too relied on today.
I want to talk about that too because one of my friends who is he's an artist and he loves special effects and he was saying too, he goes, I see these films now with the CGI and there's something that's on a lot of it, there's something missing. But then you'll see Blade Runner or you'll see 2001, which is his favorite film, and there's something that there's something real. It feels real.
Yeah, well, they age gracefully because a really good miniature, for example, whether it's a space station or a rock,
Yeah.
if it's built as well as a set would have been built, it's going to continue to be as real as Casablanca has continued to be real for Rick's Cafe.
Right.
You know, but when it's CGI, which is based on algorithms and shaders and texture maps and stuff like that, they don't age very well because that art form is continuing to develop.
And evolve. Right.
So you can see a really terrific looking movie this year, but if you look back 3 years in the future, it will age not gracefully. It might not look as good as what you're seeing currently. You know, so there's I'm not being derogatory about it because there are amazing things that are being done with computer graphics.
Right.
It's just as an art form for me, I try to limit it to maybe some 10 or 20% of a shot.
Right.
Could be computer graphics. I'm comfortable with that.
It enhances.
Digital compositing is like far better than optical printing and all the matte lines we used to struggle with. So there's a lot of things about digital image manipulation that we can do now that just tremendously increases what we can do in the movie.
But it's almost like it's best when it's enhancing something.
Yeah.
What about well, actually, I want to talk about the Back to the Future ride too, because that was, to me, again, something that you broke ground. You created, Steven Spielberg hired you to do the Back to the Future ride, and you created a cinema experience that hadn't been done before. Can you want to talk about that?
Well, when I was at Paramount, under a company I set up there called Future General Corporation, which was set up specifically to do research and development on the future of cinematic whatever, we developed the idea of the simulator ride. Because I'm a geek, and so I knew all about flight simulators, and I thought, boy, they're hydraulically, and they really make the pilot feel like whatever's happening is real.
Sure.
And I thought, well, if you could just take that idea of a flight simulator that can give a perfectly exact feeling of flying, for example, and turn it into entertainment and make a movie screen with drama and characters and story, let's adapt flight simulation to entertainment. So we did that at Paramount. We showed it to them, and they didn't get it at all. They just said, what are you wasting your time on? There's no future in that.
Wow.
And it was really disappointing to me, really frustrating, and I had to kind of let it go, moved on to other things. And a few years later, it matures into Back to the Future. And now Universal is doing it for their parks. And they get in trouble because they don't know how to do it. They just didn't know how to coordinate the physical motion with the movie.
Yep.
Because if what you feel in your body and what you see with your eyes doesn't match perfectly, you're going to
It's a problem, right? It's
not going to be a pretty picture. So I kind of worked out this whole art form of matching those two kinesthetic experiences for the Back to the Future ride, and it came out really successfully. And to me, the Back to the Future ride was a really major experiment in cinematic immersion.
Right.
The whole idea that for the first time, the screen is not just here, the screen is here. It's
around you.
It's all around you. It's a giant hemispherical dome. You're chasing this other car. Your car is moving, the other car is moving, and the characters are talking to you through the video thing on the dashboard and on the screen. And it's got 64 channels of sound. And you're in the movie.
It's virtual reality.
It's virtual reality. You're no longer sitting passively in your seat
Right.
in the movie theater. You have been ripped out of your seat and thrown through the proscenium arch into the movie. You're participating in
You're
the movie.
active, right.
Kinesthetically and in every other way. And that was just a total gas. It was so much fun making that ride.
And groundbreaking, and
Very profitable.
and you took the cinematic experience to a whole new level.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
You keep doing that, Doug.
and one of the.
You do.
I do. I love that.
I know.
That's what I do.
know. That's why you're a
But
genius.
that was with IMAX. See,
Right.
This was my first real kind of contact with IMAX
Yeah.
because we did it in IMAX.
Yep.
And we discovered things about IMAX that were frustrating. Like the IMAX cameras are big and they weigh 150 pounds and they're
Right.
noisy. And we want to make this ride where the camera has to be, as big as this.
Right.
And it has to go into the dinosaur's mouth, for example, or through a tunnel or whatever. So we built cameras from scratch. We built miniature IMAX cameras just for that ride.
Wow.
And we built motion control systems so that one motion control system controlling the camera and another motion control system is controlling the car that you're chasing, which is like aerial combat.
Right.
And that was part of a trick to confuse your persistence of vision about blurring and strobing. Because something had to be in the shot that wasn't blurring, because if the camera's suddenly panning and tilting, it's all blurred.
Right, right.
24 frames a second's not adequate.
Right.
So we designed the ride to have another vehicle in the foreground to stop the blurring and strobing. So the whole story was reverse engineered to solve problems, technical problems that were presented by the inadequacy of the frame rate.
Yep. And now you've taken that frame rate to a whole new level, right?
Yeah. We're at 120 frames.
And 120 frames is almost as if you and I are now in front of one another.
Yeah.
It's real.
What we're doing is 120 frames in 2D or 3D, any field of view you want, 4K resolution, and the surface of the screen virtually disappears. There's no more screen. It's a window onto something, reality, close to reality.
Wow.
It confuses your entire nervous system about what's real and what's not real. And this, to me, is another big cinematic moment.
Yes.
To me, is a major breakthrough. I'm right at the cutting edge of what we can do now. Way more powerful than present-day movies, which are all at 24 frames a second.
Wow.
And I'm starting to show it to the industry. And one of the little episodes we just recently had, I showed it to Ang Lee. He found out about what we were doing. He came to our studio 6 times and looked at this demo we had shot. And he wanted to shoot Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk at 120 frames a second, which he did.
Yeah.
And he did it incorrectly. And he made a little mistake, because when you go to a higher frame rate, you start approaching the frame rate of television. Television is 60 frames, not
Right.
24.
Right.
And there's no flicker, there's no shutter.
Right.
And so somehow we can unconsciously tell the difference between a television show and a movie.
Right. Yes.
We don't know what it is,
Right.
but we know it when we see it.
It's that thing.
We know it when we see it.
Right.
And when you increase the frame rate of a movie, it starts looking like television. And so you get this, what they call the soap opera look,
Right, which we don't want.
which looks too vivid. And when you see an actor or actress or a dramatic scene and it looks kind of soap opera-like, people just instantly reject it. They say, that's not a movie. That's something else. That's
Right.
too real. It's too vivid.
Right.
Uncomfortable.
Right.
Uncanny valley. Weird something. And so this is one of the big challenges I've taken on, and we've just solved it. We've got it solved.
Oh, good.
We can go at any frame rate you want, 2D or 3D, on any size screen you want, and it still looks like a movie.
Is
This is really critically
it
important.
the texture? There's something.
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. That's great.
It's a little patented secret that we're working on.
What's the other thing you're doing too? You're doing something with stages, or you're doing. Someone was saying that you're doing some building. I don't know. Is it studio space, or what is it you're creating?
Well, another of our little inventions back when I was at Future General, was I believed that there was tremendous potential in digital imagery and in the future of television. And at that time, this was in 1975, 76, there was already a thing called Ultimat used on television.
Yeah.
So you put an actor, actress in front of a blue screen
Right.
and replace the blue screen with a background.
Right.
And you could actually get, you could hold hairlines and get a really good
Right.
composite. And I thought, well, that'd be really cool if we could superimpose actors into miniature sets. This was in 1976.
Yeah.
And I talked Paramount into funding this company called Magic Camera.
Yeah.
That was the idea. And we built this stage, a big blue screen stage at Paramount. That was nothing on the stage except blue, and the actors, and the camera, which is on a dolly. The dolly has sensors on it, so the computer knows exactly where the camera is, and tells another camera that's a little periscope looking into a miniature to do exactly the same thing in real time.
Yeah.
You see the composite of an actor, person, or whatever superimposed into some environment that's just a miniature as big as this table. Very inexpensive. And Carl Sagan used this extensively in the Cosmos television
Oh,
series
yeah.
in the day.
Yeah.
It was very successful. And I thought, well, wow, this is really cool because we can do special effects in real time, inexpensively, using kind of a hybrid version of television.
Right.
Didn't go anywhere.
You're ahead of your time.
What
Yeah,
it was,
you're always ahead of your
it
time.
didn't take off. If you took a conventional director, a television director, a movie director, onto an empty stage with a blue screen, they just say,
What
I
am
don't know where I am.
Right.
I can't relate to this. So there was kind of an alienating problem.
Right.
Today, that's no longer true because we're now,
Educated.
we've actually arrived into the world of blue screens and green screens and set extensions and all the ways where everybody is saving money by not building complete
Right.
sets.
Right.
All they need is just the part of the set that the actors are in, and the rest can be synthetically added.
Yep.
So it's happening now, but in 1976, it was ahead of its time.
Right. I remember, I think AI might have been the first time I actually saw it working
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So the thing that we're doing now is that I've been building a studio at my studio where we're pushing that envelope now much more comfortably because people understand what it is.
Yep.
And we've got amazing digital cameras that are as big as a pack of cigarettes or something.
So like the
that
little
shoot-
snorkel
that
lenses.
shoot
And,
480 frames a second
wow.
and can move around like a firefly on a kind of a cable cam rig.
Are you using for the miniature? Is everything computer graphics as far as the sets?
Here's what I'm doing because I'm a mixed bag. When we're shooting, we use computer graphics because that's a way to get an instantaneous composite, so you see the actors in an environment.
Yeah.
But the environment you're looking at is temporary because you can't generate photorealistic imagery in real time.
Right.
You just can't get there.
Yep.
It has to be non-real time. You have to have 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 5 hours to make each frame photorealistic.
Yep.
So what we do is we use a computer to make a temporary background, shoot out the actors, record all that, tell the actors to go home, and then we go back and replace the computer graphics with a miniature.
Doug, are there any words of wisdom you might want to share with our young filmmakers, people who are watching?
Well, any young filmmaker today, coming up through the ranks or just starting, whatever, is no longer going to be shooting film, right?
Right.
There's almost no film laboratories left.
Correct.
That's over with. And this young budding filmmaker can get a DSLR or a GoPro or whatever kind of, you can get a really inexpensive camera that can do a pretty good job. And you can edit it, you can take that right out of the camera, put it in your laptop, make your movie, you can mix your sound and GarageBand, whatever.
The technology is there.
Technology is totally there. And the young filmmakers are totally comfortable with electronics and digital compositing and Photoshop and After Effects, all these kind of things. So what we've realized is that it's now time to re-examine some of the things we thought were always true, which are no longer accurate or effective. Like we're carrying along 24 frames a second as a standard because it was invented for sound, optical soundtracks in 1927.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to rethink that because any filmmaker, particularly anybody working in 3D, will see immediately the 24 frames is blurry and very hard to do 3D because the difference between one frame and the next creates a mess. Your brain is saying, I'm getting a headache, my eye convergence is making my eyes uncomfortable, I don't like watching it, it's too dim. And I think it's time to reevaluate where we're going and what we can do because we can still make it look exactly like a movie. Doesn't have to look like a TV show, and we can ramp up the frame rate get rid of blurring, get rid of strobing, increase the resolution, and that unleashes action. Everybody wants action.
Right.
So I dare you young filmmakers, go put your Blu-ray or DVD in your player, get to the action scene and then freeze it and see how much is really there. And what you'll see is it's blurred. It's almost unrecognizable. So during the action sequence of the big punch or the car chase or the flip or whatever, it's really a mess of unrecorded, blurry, low quality imagery.
Right.
And the funny thing, that's not even funny, it's actually tragic. If it's computer graphics, the studio and the artists have invested a huge amount of money in shaders, texture maps, geometry, architecture, all the kind of stuff to build this synthetic world, right?
Right.
That looks photorealistic. And then in order to make it look okay at 24 frames, they have to
add the blur.
blur it.
They have to add the blur.
And so 99% of what they just paid for is destroyed.
I remember
blur.
even Steven Spielberg when he was doing Jurassic Park and he was talking to Phil Tippett and he said, I need the blur.
Yeah. Well, you need blur at 24 frames.
Right.
Without blur, it doesn't work.
Right.
It looks like an animated cartoon.
Right.
And so blur is critically important for 24 frames. But as you increase the frame rate,
There will
you
be no
need less
blur.
blur.
Right.
And you record more of the action. And so the movie actually becomes much more powerful.
Because it's a
You're much more
lifelike.
kinesthetically involved in the
Right.
movie because you can see everything.
Do you think that 3D is going to be the norm?
Not necessarily. It's very, very big in China. The Chinese don't even want to see a movie that's not 3D.
Yep.
I like that.
Yep.
In this country, 3D is falling off. And I think it's not falling off for the right reasons. It's falling off because the industry has accepted low brightness and low resolution and the low frame rate. So it does give you headaches. There
Yeah.
is eye strain. There's a lot of bad things about 3D that in many ways is not as good as 2D.
Gotcha.
Because you have to put a filter on the projector, cuts the light in half. Put the glasses on, cuts the light in half again. You end up with a quarter of the light, and it's all blurred. And
that's where the headaches might come from. Not for me, but for
so we
others.
found out if you get the light back,
Right, yeah.
increase the resolution and increase the frame rate, suddenly 3D becomes like a vivid reality. That's very, very
So
powerful.
it could be the norm with the
I
right
think it could be.
technology.
I'm trying to get
make
that
that
to be
the
back.
norm.
I think we should get
It's more
back.
immersive.
We should, if we don't improve something dramatically, the movie business in theaters is going to die.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to download and stream their movies and watch them on their smartphones or their tablets.
Yeah.
It'll be dead. And movie attendance is dropping off.
Yeah.
And we got to do something about it. And we got to do something about it that's really profound and fabulous so that going out to a movie is a real rewarding experience, like going to Cirque du Soleil or a Broadway show.
I trust in Doug Trumbull to make sure that that all happens for us.
We're working on it.
I want to thank you,
Thank you.
so very, very much for your time and your talent and your wisdom and being an educator. I bow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.